Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Oh, good, good. So, as promised, this will be a different format today. um, Welcome to the Porter Community Meeting for October 21st, 2021. I'm Carolyn Van Slyke. And today we're going to be going over open designs. We've had a whole bunch of ideas pop up um, over the past few months, and it'd be kind of nice to maybe get one of them to the point where we've kind of figured out what we want to look like instead of it kind of being half of an idea. Cool. So that's the plan for today. Vaughn, I went through what we had in basically the discussion forum. That's where most of these come from. And it's kind of like tried to lay them all out what we have. Um, we have the dependencies one, which is actually a PEP at this point that I need to finish. There's another one that's related to dependencies, but it hasn't been well defined at all. We just know we need to do it, which is when we start allowing people to have more than just a single level deep of dependencies, how do we resolve that graph, right?
Yeah.
This is one that I need to split out from the dependencies PEP. I think you had recommended that. I had this extra idea, which is that one of your dependencies could essentially be an interface that could be satisfied by a couple different bundles. It doesn't have to be a specific bundle. And so that was kind of its own thing we'd like to do. Porter is a workflow engine. Right now, we kind of have two. We have one built into the Porter runtime, and it handles piping inputs and outputs to the mixins and executing them in order. We also have another workflow engine in Porter where we run the dependencies and do a very similar thing, sending inputs and outputs between the dependencies we're running and the main bundle. It'd be kind of interesting to look at if we could essentially make an abstraction where we have a workflow defined in the Porter YAML. If we could be able to convert that into representations that other existing workflow engines understand and then use them, to run pods for us or to run Docker images for us. And then Porter can kind of basically just translate the glue that it does to pipe inputs and outputs between steps onto existing engines so that we're not like re-implementing something that's out there. Because like Brigade 100% we probably could use actually for like what we do on Kubernetes right now with the operator. And I've seen, people talk about using Argo instead is another one. And then just locally, there's ones that are more fully featured workflow engines for executing multiple Docker images. So I think there's a lot we could do there. I started looking at structured logging, right? And realized there's a lot of like open questions we probably want to figure out so that we don't have to do multiple sweeps through the code. So, for example, what log levels do we want to use? How do we want to identify them? What common tags do we want to put on things? These are all stuff that we only want to do once. I'm gonna run through these just a little more quickly. This was a huge one that I think will gain us a lot of performance wins. Is instead of having mixins be binaries that we ship inside the bundles installer, if mixins were shipped as distributable units all on their own, like a Docker image, we could see big gains in like 4 different places, actually. And basically treat each mixin as a bundle, and a bundle is essentially the wiring to pass inputs and outputs between all these mixins. I think we've had a bunch of discussions about how to distribute mixins better. Obviously, if we switch to mixins not being binaries but something else, that would really change how that ends up looking, which is why we stopped going forward with that. There was a suggestion that we could make a Porter service. Like right now, Porter's a command line tool. But there's a lot of data access it does at this point, like listing installations, being able to get an output from when a bundle is run, things like that. That if Porter was hostable as a long-running service, people could query and use it and be able to get data out of the back end easily, which would be pretty neat. As soon as that one PR from Signy is done, and we've been saying that for a year, we'd really love to integrate Signy with Porter and be able to use Notary and properly sign bundles, which would be awesome. We have a couple open questions about the template language we use. So if someone want to think about that some more, it could be pretty interesting. Lots of requests for a step-through debugger for bundles. Again, if we did mixins as bundles, that would really set that up, actually. There's always kind of been a gap in Porter, which is we're great for installing things on other targets. But what if you'd like to be able to have the bundle install things on the host, right? Whoever's running it. This is less of a technical question and more of a usability. How would this look? What would the bundles be like? Do we want to open that up question? But it's been asked for a couple times. Bundles aren't restricted to Docker. We could do something else like WebAssembly. With WASI, this seems more possible. So that could be something interesting to think about. I'm going to ignore this one. And then reusable action blocks. So if you have common logic that you want to use between install and upgrade, for example, right now you have to put it in a script, right? And you kind of lose whatever nice syntax you maybe were enjoying with the mixins. So if we could actually just make a block that you could call from either, it would be kind of neat. These are all the things that have come up that I think have a ton of potential that we just need as a group to, chew on. Vaughn, I was kind of looking to talk to you about what the priority would be on which one we'd like to think about first. I think some of these are linchpin ones, like mixins as bundles would dramatically change how we would implement like 3 or 4 of these.
Yeah, as you've mentioned, that in terms of like reach across these other things, that's the first one that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
A quick win, perhaps. Looking at the other ones, a quick win perhaps could be the Porter service. I mean, it probably fairly straightforward to build kind of an API server, and then the CLI can just make API calls.
Yeah.
Mohammed
Can
laid
I
out
throw
what
in
it could.
a vote there? Oh, sorry.
Oh, you want? Yeah. Let's put little.
Well, not even a vote. I just want to let you know that like this is a use case I'm working on. Like I've been writing a K8s native service that is using, I pinned to a specific version of the Porter operator, and I've tried using Argo to wrap aspects of it. I ended up having to write my own custom service, but effectively this idea that I can have the installation resource, the installation CRD is like the entry point to get logs, status, and output, that means I can use it in a variety of different workflow engines and these various use cases. But yeah, I've got like a working prototype of something that's like Azure Service Bus message that says, hey, install this bundle, apply this credential set. We have a web UI where we expose parameters to users, and it goes in and installs the bundle for them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I definitely have some operator feedback that I can collect and get into a GitHub issue or discussion or wherever
Yeah,
that would be
please.
appropriate. You know,
That'd be great. Just because you're talking about the operator, I just pushed huge change to the
cool.
operator
I've been
last
waiting for
night,
that. Yeah.
and it's not done, but it's far enough along that if someone wanted to kick the tires on it, they could.
Yeah.
I just added docs to the repo last night that explain how to do it, and we need people to try it and be like,
Yeah.
Does it work?
I'm doing a demo to my company of my POC at the end of the month. And after that, I get to go in and implement into the operator as needed to help with some of this. So
yeah, because it kind of, I mean, I hope I was clear with people that like the operator as it was written before is being completely redone. And it's built on top of Porter's new commands that we've added in V1. So it's going to look very different when you try switching over. But if you definitely give me the feedback you have right now on the current operator. And when you have time, like give it a shot, the new one. Because the sooner we get the feedback, the less reworking we do. Yeah.
great.
But the Porter service would just be, I think, a critical augmentation to the operator. Because as you were noting, like just working with the CRDs, I mean, obviously I'm not putting all the info we need on the CRDs to begin with. We're not updating status yet. But even then, it's kind of this awkward shim that I think will always be lagging behind what people need. If we're always going, let's export more data out of Porter's backend store and into various pieces of Kubernetes, like, oh, we'll add extra CRDs or we'll stuff more in the status. If people could just query a service, I think, self-service is good. So
KubeCon had a great talk. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to point people to this. Mohammed actually has an entire thing laid out of what it could look like. And I thought it was pretty interesting. It wouldn't be a plugin. It doesn't have to be gRPC, but the concept of it as a service, he outlined a whole bunch of great ideas here. I would encourage people to look at that.
I was just going to quickly say that at KubeCon, one of the talks was how Argo is extensible, and you can basically apply plugins to it, even to like brand and change the web UI for it. And I could definitely see these bundles kind of being a first-class citizen that Argo could support, and it would be lower in scope to like extend the Argo UI to show bundle specific information. That's something I'm going to be looking into a little bit more with my team.
Oh yeah, that'd be really interesting to hear more as you dig into it. I honestly have not used Argo, so I just hear about it a lot. It comes up. So just thinking about like surface area for a second, this would be, not only is it a linchpin, but this would be like a invasive change. We'll put it that way in Porter. It would kind of halt work on a whole bunch of different fronts because you wouldn't want to be dealing with merge conflicts in these areas. The Porter service would be almost completely, I think, independent, which is kind of neat. If someone was interested in moving forward on this one, I don't anticipate it would clash too much with our work in V1 or with the operator, other than the operator would want to use it. So if we wanted to focus our time and spend a couple meetings, just really hashing out what these should look like, because I think we've kind of in the past just the maintainers have talked amongst themselves, come up with a general idea, and then implemented it. And some of these I think are big enough that's not going to work well. We're going to need to figure out where we want it to go and how it's going to like interact with everything up front before we code anything. So Vaughn, which ones were you voting for?
Um,
Go to this one so we can see them a little better.
At least recently, I've been running into template language things. Like,
Yeah.
so currently, correct me if I'm wrong. I could be out of date. Like, the only templating we can do or resolution is in actions.
Yep. So it's a big limitation.
Yeah, so it'd be nice, just like you have that bullet there. How can we make the entire Porter YAML templatable?
Yeah.
But that's only kind of recent experience. I don't know how. Yeah, I would vote for that one, but and it's also probably an semi-isolated chunk of work.
It would heavily impact the runtime manifest. That's the code piece. If you're thinking about like where it would land, it would be in that runtime binary in the runtime manifest struct, because that's where we essentially do the collecting of outputs from one step and piping it into the next step and kind of keeping this state bag that says here are all the things that we could template, and we inject on the fly like per command as we have to execute it. So that's where this would go, just based how it is currently implemented. But I think for this issue, we could definitely step back and think about if there's different ways to approach what we're doing with Porter, with passing data in between the mix-ins.
I'm just curious, are you thinking like you see this in Helm and even Argo and other allow this, like it's the Golang templating with sprig functions, and you're basically rendering before processing? Is that kind of what you're thinking there?
It's not Go templates, but it is, and I don't know what sprig is, but it is a similar concept essentially that we have. We use mustache templating in our YAML file, which is those double curly braces. And it allows you to do things like pass an output from a previous step into the next step and be able to use it, like maybe you got a connection string out of Terraform and you want to pass it to Helm set flag, is where you'd see that. Yeah. We've talked with the Helm team, and they're the ones who actually warned us off doing Go templates in the first place. Yeah. That's why we didn't do it in Porter.
Lessons learned. Okay, good to know.
Yeah, so we kept it really lightweight, and that's why we did mustache. But one thing that's been interesting is this wasn't around when we first started, but it's the Q schema language. See if I can find it. Q. Oh, Google. There we go. I don't want to go into this too much, but something like this may be worth spending an hour and figuring out how well this could work for us. I've been chatting with people like at Prometheus about how they're going to use it for some of their stuff. And it seems like it could be pretty powerful and a definite contender for a different way to do the Porter YAML in general instead of a YAML file. So I feel like there's a lot of possibilities with this template language one. Like if we really wanted to not feel constrained by what we've done with Porter before, it could go in a lot of different directions. At the base of it though, like just this is what a lot of people are asking for. They're not really asking for Q or whatever. They just want to be able to use, for example, like I have a parameter and I want to be able to use that parameter to interact with other parts of the bundle than just the actions we're running, So I get a parameter and I want to use it and pass it down to my dependencies has been one ask. you know? Or I want to be able to save it off and have the mixin use that in some way instead of passing it to the mixin every darn time. Things like that. Trying to think if there's other pieces people wanted to template. We have an issue that's kind of tracking some of those asks. Yeah. I have been working on this one, by the way, which is integrating Porter with open telemetry so that we can send the data to a collector like Jaeger, or I'm trying to think. I'm flailing on what's, Honeycomb is another one. I think all the clouds have various support for this too, to just collect metrics out of here. And what drove the whole thing is if you look at Porter's output when it runs, it's just like it's text soup, and being able to have more control over what gets printed and not kind of having it be double duty of printing to the console for all of our debugging needs, being able to just log it to a file or something else with the verbosity turned all the way up would be incredibly useful to us. It's a super invasive change, but kind of in a not terribly exciting way. It's just all of our log statements, wouldn't be print lines anymore.
Well,
with that
and
cleanup,
okay.
sorry. Oh, just like showing users like this was just the output of executing your bundle versus maybe what.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's that's what yeah, we're looking at UI that can show the bundle author the output of running their bundle for troubleshooting it versus someone who's running a service that's deploying the bundles. So.
Yeah, it's we've written it so far to help us. To help the authors essentially and the maintainers. And I feel sorry for people who just want to know what the bundle did because it's hard to pull out of there. So that would be the idea. So I'd be happy to take my initial stuff and make a document, and I think it's not too complicated what it is. Maybe asynchronously we could just chat on that on GitHub and kind of see if we're missing any integrations. I think that's the biggest thing is I'd hate to replumb all of Porter and then realize, oh, if we just added this one extra thing, we could do something really neat. So that's all I'm trying to suss out with that one.
There's a project on GitHub called PodInfo, and it's kind of a reference Kubernetes, and I always just use that as here's a structure for a new service, and it's got the open telemetry, Prometheus, and all that sort of stuff as like a foundation.
Yeah. Prometheus is interesting because I personally don't quite know what metrics people would even want, if that makes sense. The tracing is what's terribly interesting to me for debugging Porter. So I'd love to have people chime in on some other things that may need to be collected because I just don't have a lot of experience with that.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that tracing is big too. I think just the structured logs and tracing is a big win and most likely worth the disruptive changes and bringing in this step. Not just like you mentioned, not just for us as developers and stuff, but for people running the operator running Porter, just being able to see the flow of execution is huge.
Cool. So I can take what I've done so far and kind of write up a design for it. Nothing too formal. I know I made a PEP process and I think it's overwhelming. So if we just keep it to minimum details, don't try to re-explain something that we all kind of know. I think we can get a good document and kind of agree on it and ship the initial stuff I have for structured logging. And it sounds like Porter Service would be the next one we'd like to do,
Yeah,
based
on
on what
that one.
people said.
At that one, we'll treat 1313 as like the hub for discussion. And
Yeah, I think that's a good place right now to kind of. I don't even think it's ready for a design document. It'd be nice to just understand what we intend it for. Like my biggest question when I thought about this was, do we want to expose it as a data service or as something that can actually mutate things? Like, for example, run a bundle. Because there's a huge difference in the performance characteristics of this service if it's doing long running actions like that, or if it's just fetching data and, being a CRD layer essentially to a CRUD layer to our back end. It would really impact the scope of what we're trying to do with it, one way or the other. Brian, do you have any thoughts on using it to run bundles versus only being basically a data feed?
Honestly, yeah, I don't view it necessarily as running bundles, and it may not even be necessary as a data feed. I kind of view this as like the CRD is the point of entry. You create a new CRD, you get a new installation, and then we're using the kube APIs to get the information we need. That's where, you got labeling and things like that to be able to say, let me get a list of installations, being able to get outputs and logs and status. If the entry point becomes like the CRD resource.
Well, can we step back for a second?
Yeah,
Porter does not store its data in Kubernetes. It's not etcd.
Right. Yeah.
So
it's using the
for example,
Kubernetes plugin. Yeah.
So for example, let's say you want to get the output from when a bundle ran. Okay. That data is in V1, it's going to be in Mongo. Okay. Maybe off cluster. And how the thing I run into when you start mentioning CRDs is, and maybe this is, I'm not looking at it right, is that we would end up duplicating all the data that's in Porter's backend database as things in etcd in the cluster.
Right. Yeah.
And I definitely feel like we should do that for some
etcd.
things.
Yeah.
For some things, I think it makes a lot of sense, but I don't think replicating everything is going to help us. And when we did actually have a Kubernetes plugin for the operator, and we ran into a lot of limitations in trying to store data that way, abusing secrets
like
and
the current
data.
system that I'm working with, that is a POC, it's pointers to Azure Key Vault for, so the outputs of what we're doing, it's just pointers to where it's being stored at. So we're using, like, depending on the type of output, and this isn't bundle specific or anything, but we put that in outside object or key storage. And
so if someone wanted to retrieve that data, what does that look like?
Yeah, and that's where, this is the pattern I've seen in Argo, where you can, at like a service level, say, here's our storage back end, and Argo just kind of acts as a pass-through. So you get like a standard interface through Argo to get that, but it's saying, oh, I'm going off to S3 or whatever. They have a whole laundry list of artifact backends that they support, but you just get a consistent interface to them.
Okay, so I've heard a lot what you've said, but I'm having trouble piecing it all together to understand your feedback on having a service, essentially. Because it sounds like we just agreed that we don't want to duplicate the data out of Porter's backend database. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay. But how do people query then and get data out? If, like, I was thinking we'd expose a service, it could be in the cluster or anywhere, really, it doesn't matter. And it essentially gives you a unified way to get at Porter's backend data, which may have different plugins putting that data in different places, right? And that abstracts it. You can just ask the service, Porter will resolve plugins, have them do their thing, and give you the data. I Can't tell where you stand on that though.
Yeah, no, I will say, yeah, I think I lean more towards operator functionality versus a service that would, yeah, I think what I'm thinking of as a service is another layer on top of this, which, and I'm still kind of doing my homework on this. I'm kind of digging into like I'm kind of dissecting how Argo does some of this. But it's really like, I think you should err on the side of Kubernetes native for APIs. And I think a service is, yeah, I don't even know. I wouldn't imagine needing to have a separate API then that's Porter specific in a service. I think I'm thinking more like how would a web interface fit on top of this? And it really should be able to use everything that the operator uses or provides to support like a web UI or a command line tool or something like that, to get additional information.
I feel like we're still talking and not
So
quite hearing each
yeah,
other.
I think maybe I'm downvoting the service then based on as I'm thinking through this a little bit more. I think it's more the operator functionality, and you get what you need out of the service. You get the service functionality by just having an operator.
So if I was on a cluster, okay,
Yeah.
and or I mean, to be honest, the operator needs this to be implemented, which is why I'm keen on it.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
operator does not have Porter in it. Porter has a whole bunch of config
Right.
and is highly pluggable, right? And resolving all of that and doing all of that is not baked into the operator. Porter at the moment spins up a job and runs the Porter CLI and kind of interacts with it that way because it was originally written to execute bundles, which take 30 minutes to run, so it didn't need to be in the operator. But what we're running into is at the end of the run, I need to get status out of Porter's back database, right? Of all sorts of records, basically, that came out of that. Most importantly, did it succeed? What was run? That kind of stuff. So that we can update the status on the CRD for installation. But other people, I think you've asked for this too, is, well, how do I get the output from that installation having run, right?
Yeah.
And so that one, I'm like, I'd be pretty tempted to say, if people want things to be dumped into a CRD so you could see the outputs, that would make a lot of sense. Wanting to see some of Porter's data, I think it would be, again, you start getting into this weird situation of, are you shipping a whole bunch of data back out into CRDs?
Right.
So I'm curious what you think, because you seem to be the one who would use something like this.
Yeah, it's the operator really, because at the end of the day, I can query Kubernetes to get a list of all the installations that have been done. You follow patterns like, if you uninstall a bundle, the installation resource doesn't necessarily go away. Maybe it has a TTL or something like that. And so I keep making references back to Argo where it runs these workflows and just leaves the resources there. And then it's a secondary step or an additional config on a expiration time for leaving those records in the cluster. And then, but really it's the installation resource that's the focal point for all of this. And I think the more I think about this, most of what I want from a service, I would get by just querying the Kubernetes API and looking at those installation resources.
Okay. You brought up one thing that was just kind of interesting because it's counter to how the operator is going to be written. Is right now, it hasn't been implemented, but will be in a week. So I want to ask you about this. When the CRD for the installation is deleted, that's how we're indicating that we want it uninstalled.
Yeah. I thought I heard talk of it heading in that direction.
Yeah.
But
we haven't
my
done it
use
yet.
case, then Yeah, I would lose a record of it happening if I was counting on these resources being in there. And instead of that, like, yeah, this is where I've seen like the pattern in Argo where I can either say immediately remove the resource after the uninstall is done, or keep it for 90 days or whatever the retention period is for it.
For just the record?
Yeah, so that way I would have the installations and whatever logs output, et cetera, associated with it for as long as I set that expiration period.
How are they indicating that they want it removed in the first place?
I believe like Argo workflows, it's just an attribute, like an annotation or something where you can put in that's expiration time effectively. And, you know, the reconcile loop in the operators is part of its reconcile is, oh, these have expired, get rid of them. You know, just like, I think jobs and cron jobs work that way in Kubernetes right now, where they tend to leave the resources around. They err on the side of leaving the evidence. And
I was more asking, how does someone indicate I want an uninstall to happen?
Oh,
because at the moment, the way it looks is if you make the CRD,
right?
we run install. If you edit the CRD, we'll trigger and see if anything changed, and we'll run an upgrade. And then the next logical conclusion from that was if you delete the CRD, we'll uninstall. So if we don't do that, how do you indicate that you want it gone? That you want it uninstalled?
I would want to, an uninstall state for it effectively, yeah.
Like on the spec?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd have to think through some of this, because the other thing I'm thinking through is like, what does it look like when you're doing custom actions potentially in a bundle to do?
Yep, we don't have that on the new operator. Yeah. We just have install, upgrade, and uninstall.
Yeah. I think it's best to leave it at that for now.
Yeah, for custom actions, if we wanted to do that, the plan was to have another CRD that's literally just run this porter command, and it gives you access to that, and then you can run invoke and do all sorts of stuff,
I've been thinking about bundles with standard ready Z and health Z actions and things like that,
Yeah. Okay, I'll have to think about that some more, because like I said, I haven't implemented uninstall yet, but I hadn't thought that people were going to use this CRD as a way to know what Porter has, but it makes sense. So we'll have to come up with something there.
And I'd be happy to go over what the POC I have a little bit more. I just don't know if I can, what kind of form I can do it in yet.
Yeah. So. You're always free to just DM me things.
Yeah.
If that's Great. Allowed for you.
Yeah.
Because one way we could do it is, a field that essentially says like uninstalled true, right? And you flip it and we'll try to uninstall it for you and update the status to say that's what happened. And that may make a lot of sense. Or an annotation. I hate annotations though, because they feel like they're unstructured freebie data. Yeah. Okay. I'm glad you brought that up. That's really timely. So for the service, I agree. Inside of Kubernetes, people would want to interact with it using Kubernetes native things, right? I think Porter operator itself may have a sidecar that is the service, just to help it do what it needs to do at the same time. But maybe we don't expose it. It's just our sidecar, Some of the things that Mohammed was laying out were outside of Kubernetes experiences. So for example, being able to interact with Porter through either another language because you want to automate it, or through like editors and things like that. So that was kind of, he had kind of a neat take on how to do it. So I think it still has value, but inside of the operator, I think it would be an implementation detail for us, but not what we expose. Let me get that written down. Okay. So it sounds like we got 3 things that maybe we could work on, you know, asynchronously as we kind of flesh these out in GitHub. We'll do this service in this GitHub discussion, and I'll make a PEP for the structured logging because I think that's far enough along. Vaughn, do we touch this? Because I'd love to start thinking about it.
We haven't touched that yet.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't. I think I looked up the link. Let's drop a link to.
Yeah.
Because this is in its current form a discussion.
It is. It is. Yeah. Yeah. Man, I was on a roll in March. I came up with like 4 ginormous things that we had no time to think about. There we go. Yeah.
I only. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just looking if I had a picture. They're not terribly helpful pictures. So I won't worry about it.
Hey, those are neat pictures.
Oh, you like my pictures? I made them in PowerPoint, dude.
My only reservation with this one is just as, you know, it's intimidating in terms of scope, and if the design and like the wins from this are like fairly apparent, but just want to get your take on like how urgent.
Okay. Well, I think that a lot of the things we want to do will be better if we do this first. Some big wins immediately. The invocation image size will drastically be reduced. Okay. We will finally be able to take advantage of Docker layer caching. Right now, every single bundle, when it's built, you know, we run commands from the mixins inside the Docker file to build up the final installer image. And the order is different. There's very little commonality between bundles that actually end up in reusable layers. And this would change to every single mixin is an entirely reusable layer, and it doesn't matter the order they were included or anything. So image sizes for any real bundle are well over a gig, is what we're seeing. People doing a complex bundle, pretty much anything that uses unfortunately, the Azure CLI, which is a beast, it clocks in and over a gig, and it makes me feel bad. We'd be able to reuse the infrastructure for distribution and security. When you think about how we distribute mixins today, like we never finished, right? We're just like, here, download this binary. It's fine. It's completely unversioned. There's no way to say in the bundle what mixin you need to be built against. We'd immediately be able to say, here's the OCI reference for the mixin, its exact version, and we just take advantage of Docker daemon caching. We don't have to implement anything, which is kind of cool. And again, mixin provenance and signing and security, we just get for free. Because of all the layer caching, builds, publish, and running the bundle will be faster. And you don't lose the existing mixins. Literally just put the binary in a Docker file and go. You know what I mean? The interface between a mixin and Porter has always been standard in, standard out. That you just literally lift that over and go, okay, instead of a binary, I'm talking to a Docker container. But it doesn't actually change how we talk to the mixins, which is kind of slick. And it's also kind of neat because we're then implementing our own things on top of bundles. I think it would give us a lot of the advantages of doing bundles in the first place for ourselves. So that's why I think it's going to be super useful. I don't know if that helps what you were asking about, Juan.
This is the is it time to optimize discussion, right? All images start out as like full OS multi-gig things, it seems like, and then you start whittling down.
Yeah, is it time to optimize in one? And also is that if you look at one of the other issues, and this is what I meant by it's a linchpin, is that things we want to do with workflow engine, for example, mix-in distribution, and some of these other things, we either get for free or we get at a drastically reduced cost because of all of a sudden we're inheriting a mature infrastructure for these things instead of re-implementing it ourselves. But yeah, no, it's definitely an optimization. What we have kind of works, but it's not security-wise, it's not where it needs to be. And that's what this would get us, which as we get closer to 1.0 and people using this in production, I really want to make sure we're not shipping something that is ignoring a whole bunch of established security wins that we could have just picked up. Yeah.
And what's that bundle index bullet?
Oh yeah. This is broken off from the dependencies PEP. Let me just bring that up real quick. I had a lot of ideas in the dependencies PEP, and then as you pointed out, there was some of them are too big to go in this one thing. The idea is that Porter could have a list essentially of bundles I've seen before. What bundles are allowed to be run? Who are they from? What interfaces do they implement? If I'm trying to resolve a dependency graph and I need a bundle that implements MySQL, and it'll give me a MySQL connection string when it's run. What is the search space to resolve that bundle? All of Docker Hub? I mean, that we can't really do that, So the concept is that the administrator for Porter could say, when we need to resolve a bundle that gives you a database, this is the one we're going to use. And they can populate that in the bundle index. So this is where it discusses that. I'll link back to that. So you can see what bundles are used by the teams, not installations, but the actual bundles. You can figure out what the bundles are used for, and then curate what bundles we want people either to be able to use through allow list, deny lists, or just when you're looking for a bundle that does X, if you didn't specify it yourself, the default for staging is the dev server. The default for prod is some really expensive thing we, outfit somewhere else. And in a dev environment, it's, we'll just roll something random on your dev cluster and give you Mongo or MySQL or whatever. That's the idea, is being able to say, where do I resolve dependencies from?
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. This is another one that kind of stands alone. It doesn't really interact with some of these other ones too much. Like if we added this concept to Porter, there's nothing really that would get held up. Like it wouldn't hold up the Porter service, for example, or mixins as bundles. That's a beautiful URL. So I guess I'm asking if people are willing to talk about mixins as bundles with me from week to week and start thinking about this as something we'd like to do after V1. but start thinking about it now.
Yeah, I certainly like. Yeah, all your points are super compelling. I certainly like the ideas behind it. Yeah, I'm not ready to commit to take ownership of the design, but certainly,
Almost tricked you.
yeah, certainly ready to, continue hashing it out. Like,
Yeah.
mhm.
Okay. Yeah, I think that'd be great. We can just continue talking about it in 1499, that discussion there, and just kind of work through scope and impact, essentially, of what's going to be impacted by this. What do we need to be aware of? And are there any things that we haven't thought of yet that this would either cause problems or we need to prep for, or hold off doing elsewhere in Porter while we work on it? Oh man, I'm so excited. So for the next couple meetings, it's not going to be demos and stuff like that, but it will be talking about, I guess, these three, and we'll try to move them forward, and get, the goal is to get all of them to the point where they're like fully designed and we've approved the design, and when we have someone who has time to work on it, they know what to do, and we won't end up with weird PRs where we're like, wait, whoa, I have doubts. Okay. Was there anything people had questions about or just thoughts before we close?
I'm just curious if there's like any kind of catalog of existing public bundles.
Yeah. There isn't. That's the really short answer. We would love to work more, and we tried to initially get OCI registries to have more of a concept of, this is the type of the artifact that we're storing, and being able to surface that up a little bit better. Didn't really have much success with that. I think individual registries may start doing that in the future, though. Like Azure Container Registry, we're keenly interested in bundles at Microsoft, so we'll probably do that, But we don't really have like a central registry that's essentially just all bundles and it's indexed and you can look through it. What I would be interested in doing is maybe when we're a little further along, coordinating with the CNCF, I think it's called Artifact Hub. Are you familiar with that? They have like OLM packages in there. Obviously, they have Helm charts in there. I think, what are they called? Build packs, I think, is another one. They have a couple different types of things. It'd be cool to be like, bundles are another type of thing that you could register and put up on Artifact Hub. But there's nothing right now.
Yeah, that is a great question. Just bundle discovery in general.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to see in Porter too, just an easier way to go, show me all the versions that are even available for this bundle, right? Because at the moment, I usually end up going to the registry and looking at like the tag page and trying to figure out, well, what's the latest version. I don't want to use the tag latest, for example. I want to know what it is for real and things like that. And being able to have, we use Google's like container registry library under the hood. We could query it and get information like that, which would at least help a little bit to go, I know the bundle, what's available to me to use.
Now, maybe in the meantime, I can start tagging GitHub repos and things where we're starting to put public ones out there. So.
That would be amazing. Even if we just kind of had a page or a JSON feed or anything. If you would like to help curate that, we will totally host it and promote it.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of evangelizing its use to solve problems, but also developing the service that it takes to run them for everybody, So I definitely like to be able to share some more of that as we move forward with it and get your feedback there. So
Yeah, no, we would love to help promote and make it easier to discover bundles that we essentially know are production ready or ready for someone to use. They're, you know, we know they're secure, things like that. That'd be great. Well, thanks everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. I will send out to the mailing list a link of where we can find these discussions to keep chatting about these features in between meetings. And next time we'll come back and hopefully we'll be able to kind of hash out more thoughts and move these designs forward on these 3 issues here. All right. Thanks everyone.
Thanks. See ya.
thanks.